in a conceptual and moral way. They explain the relation in terms of what they call a black sacred cosmos, which is a parallel universe to European Christianity. The idea of the black sacred cosmos is in part a response to other sociologists who hold that African American churches are just aberrational attempts to mimic mainstream white culture. These other sociologists say that African American churches exhibit no exceptional elements that would distinguish them from European Christianity and culture. But for sociologists like Lincoln and Mamiya, African American churches are religious and moral alternatives to North American mainline denominations.
We will not live in fear because we are children of God. And when it's all over down here, and when the night will no longer crowd in upon us, and when we'll no longer stand on the banks of this river, we'll be able to declare, like Martin King declared, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last.
African American churches tend to be evangelical. For these churches, preaching tends to be based on biblical stories from both the Hebrew scriptures and Christian gospels. It seeks to convert the unchurched to Christianity. Such ideas as holiness and sanctification are often used to describe this function of preaching. Gospel music and charismatic preaching are often a prominent part of their religious life. The social teachings of African American churches tend to be egalitarian. In fact, this egalitarian emphasis fundamentally identifies the social teachings of the African American churches. This emphasis has perhaps nowhere been so evident as in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But the sociologists Lincoln and Mamiya argue that the influence of the African American churches is best seen not in broad civil rights activism, but rather in their internal influence on African American culture itself. With the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and early 70s, African American churches began examining their possible connections with traditional African religions.
There is a resurgent, I like to use the word renaissance. There is a renaissance of African religions occurring right now as we speak. It has, in my opinion, reached its second stage. The first stage of the expression of the religion was the way that the religion had to be expressed during the enslavement years. By virtue of the way slavery worked at that time in the various locations, the religions had to go underground. They could not be practiced publicly. If they were practiced publicly, they had to be practiced under a facade or with a mask or pretending to do something that you really weren't doing or pretending to be something that you're not. Within the last, I would say 50 years, since the 1950s, the religion has begun to go through another birthing process, and that birthing process, in my view, based on what I have observed, is for the religion to come to another stage of its full circle expression, which is to become public.
The dramatic and oral aspects of African traditional culture were seen more prominently in non-religious institutions such as African American art, music, theater, literature, cinema, and radical political organizations. Distinctive elements of African traditional religions do appear among African American Catholics and also among devotees of neo-traditional Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Brazilian religious cults. But the numbers in such groups are small, and they are outside the mainstream of African American religious practice. Traditional African religions provide valuable insights for our understanding of human civilizations. They are living reminders of the ancient tribal and ancestral origins of most so-called great religions. The history of African and African American religion is a story of syncretism and conversion. The fact that traditional African religious beliefs have survived suggests that these beliefs continue to be vital sources of religious and moral meaning, both in post-colonial Africa and in the Americas. African traditional religions can effectively focus religious experience in a variety of oral arts and dramatic performances, whether in Africa's indigenous church movements or neo-traditional movements, in Haiti's voodoo and Cuba's Santeria.